Game 2 went down last night at Rogers Arena. Canucks fell victim to the Predators and lost by a score of 4-1. And the series is tied 1-1. So we're bringing in today Adam Kierszenblat, who covers the Vancouver Canucks with the Hockey News. He also covers the WHL. He was at Rogers Arena last night. Let's get him in here and get his thoughts on the game. Adam Kierszenblat, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you guys for having me on your podcast.
Thanks for joining us short notice. So, what happened last night? We get the news during the day that Thatcher Demko is out for at least one game, and then now we know it's week to week. Casey Dismiss starts, and I know what happened in the first 74 seconds. There's a chant by the Canucks fans, and next thing you know, he surrenders the first goal.
Yeah, that was not an ideal start, obviously, for the Vancouver Canucks. But I mean, you can't really blame Casey DeSmith on that goal. It's a tip where the puck goes the other way, and he's already moving side to side. He's not a massive goaltender in size. He doesn't have that stretch of Thatcher Demko. But I mean, it was a comedy of errors. You have Quinn Hughes falling down, which doesn't happen in the defensive zone. You have Pettersson losing a battle along the boards. You have Anthony Beauvillier tipping a puck, and then Casey Smith going the other way. So it was just like one after another series of events that probably won't happen again in the series that all just led to that goal.
Definitely, it was a game of some bounces, and it didn't really go Vancouver's way. And near the end of that period, we saw that Pettersson, the token one timer on the power play, and he misses the side of the net, and it seemed like that played a pivotal role for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at Pettersson, like people are going to talk about how he's not confident and everything, but he had 7 blocked shots. So 7 of his shots were blocked. And, it's kind of, we have to put ourselves into that mentality when you just keep shooting the puck and it keeps getting blocked, like you're going to be a little bit more hesitant. That's why we saw, Pettersson passing up shots. It's kind of like when you're walking up a set of stairs and you trip over the same step every time. You're going to have second thoughts when you get to that step. You're going to slow down. Like, what more can I get the argument that Pettersson hasn't been good in this series. That Colton Sissons goal, he probably should have been a little bit stronger on the back check, but he had 9 shot attempts. Only 2 of them missed the net. I know that there's going to be a lot of focus on the empty net, but he is trying to generate something, and it has to be frustrating when 7 of your shots just get absorbed by Nashville Predators.
I was also at the game last night, but not in the capacity of working media, but as a fan. And let me just say, being a part of that crowd is probably one of the most memorable experiences of my life, and it will still continue to be. But we can sort of say that, okay, Pettersson had an off night. He wasn't getting the shots that he wanted, but we also got to give credit where it's due to the Nashville Predators defense. After the game, JT Miller was comparing it to when he was with Tampa Bay, was comparing it to how Columbus was able to shut down Tampa Bay in the first round back in 2019. But how big of a role do you think Nashville's defense played yesterday?
I mean, Nashville's defense and their willingness to get in front of pucks was the reason that Vancouver lost. Like, Vancouver should not have lost that game. You look at 33 shots blocked, 33 misses, and 18 shots for the Vancouver Canucks. How many times do you see 33 blocked shots in a game? Like, Nashville didn't have the puck for virtually any time in the offensive zone in the third period. They really didn't have the puck at all throughout the game. 15 shots only on Casey DeSmith. Like, this is, I this is it was a super frustrating game because everything Vancouver did, Nashville had an answer to. You look at Hughes, 5 block shots, Hronek, 4 block shots, JT Miller had 3 block shots. Like, at some point, you just have to say, what more can we do, and tip your hat to the Nashville Predators.
It's been an underlying question or an underlying sort of what's been happening. Game one, the Canucks couldn't really generate any chances on net for the first few moments there. It seemed to be the similar case in game two as well, as shot attempts were 84 to 36, but the Canucks were only able to get 18 shots on goal. How do you think what strategies can they implement here to try and improve that shot accuracy?
Well, I think it is that you need to take those low percentage shots. This has been a problem for the Vancouver Canucks all season. So when I say low percentage shots, it's not necessarily those shots from the point, but maybe shots along the wall. Try to create rebounds, get shots in feet. You know, JT Miller talked about looking for sticks. Those are where the deflections come from. But even something as simple as just jamming the puck beside the net, you know, even if you don't think that that's going to create a chance, what it does is it plants a seed that they're going to try that. So you have to be able to get away from the perimeter a little bit and create some opportunities. Nashville's going to do a really good job of clogging the front of the net. So how can you counter that? There's a lot of passing. There's a lot of hesitation in the Vancouver game because they just see a Nashville jersey, and because Nashville has planted that thought of we're going to block every single shot, there is a little bit of a hesitation. But sometimes those low percentage shots, like we saw in that first Nashville goal, are the ones that go in, especially in the playoffs.
Rick Tocchet in his post game presser there talked about execution, and as much as Nashville blocked a ton of shots, um, he talked about execution and just those attempts that they did have that got through, or they could have taken a shot and they decided to make that extra pass. Zadorov said it as well. He goes that they generated enough chances for them to get to overtime.
Yeah, this goes back to something that Vancouver has done all year, is that they're such a skilled team, so they're always looking for that high danger chance. And like I said, this is something that is not new. So when you look at kind of how they rank, they always rank in the mid range shots lower than 50%. Low range shots, they're kind of in a little bit over 50% at the season, but they like I said, they deserve to win this game. They created enough opportunities. They got bodies to the front of the net. It just wasn't happening. It was just one of those games. Unfortunately, it's a crucial game because now instead of going to Nashville up 2-0, this turns into a best of 5 series. And I can tell you that Bridgestone Arena is going to be rocking. They already have the car set up outside. It's an intimidating place to play, especially for a lot of players who this will be their third playoff game in front of a crowd. So we'll see how the Canucks come back if they continue to generate chances. Like if they continue to play the way that they did last time, if they get, 80 shot attempts on net, Nashville's not going to block 33 every game. Like that's just an irregularity. If they are, then that would be a historically amazing defensive series. Even like Chalka talked about it like yesterday, you know, he said Nashville had around 5 high danger chances at even strength. Like he'll take that every day of the week. If you look at the heat map, Nashville generated nothing essentially. Like the heat map was dry for the Nashville Predators, but they still walked out with a 4-1 win because of that defensive performance. But yeah, if they keep generating chances, if they can actually hit the net, because 33 misses is also a little bit ridiculous, but it's not. It is a problem that Vancouver has had because they do shoot very high a lot of the time. But if they continue to force the issue, they get some of those opportunities and they actually hit the net, it should produce more offensive numbers and hopefully be enough to win that series.
Back in 2011, both of these teams were tied 1-1 heading to Nashville as well. And the player that really took over from that point over was Ryan Kesler. Now, Kesler was at Rogers Arena last night. What do you make of the ovation he got?
Well, I mean, there's always this love for Ryan Kesler, and there's a lot of love for players that had these historic moments in Vancouver. I know that the ending wasn't as a lot of fans wanted, but there was a lot of frustration around that time that Kesler requested a trade. The organization was even though they did have a strong season the year after with Willie Desjardins, the organization was kind of in their downward trajectory. It didn't also help that Kesler dropped the "I hate Canadians" in 2010 at the Olympics, but like Kessler's such a he's such a like massive figure in Canucks history. Like he really took over that series. It's one of the best individual performances by a Vancouver Canuck in a playoff series of all time. The fans realize that now that I think that there's a little bit of time passed, there are some people who are willing to forgive what happened and kind of focus on the positives. Now, there's always going to be people who say, you know what, he was great, but the way that he left, that's going to be unforgivable. But it's also that atmosphere. You know, you're in the playoffs. Everybody has the white towels going. Everybody's on pins and needles. And you see Ryan Kessler, who dominated the Nashville Predators, come out and crank the siren. Like, U2's playing in the background. You have his son on the ice holding up the towel. Like, it's just, they created the perfect environment for Kessler to succeed. But you also look back to the Sedin's retirement. Like, there is still a little bit of love for Kessler, even though the situation didn't end the way that either side probably wanted it to.
Now we talk about
Yeah,
Kessler as
go ahead. Sorry.
Now we talk about Kessler as well, and you know how he took over in that 2011 series. JT Miller has gotten a lot of comparisons to Kessler in their ability to play and their point scoring as well. But in what way do you see JT Miller taking over the series if it is his role?
Well, JT Miller is such a polarizing figure as well. He's also an American, so there's that comparison. But like Kessler was at his best when he was like driving the net, when he was playing in front of that net, like throwing hits. JT Miller isn't he's JT Miller's not gonna have the same defensive impact necessarily as Kessler did, but he might have a more physical impact. You know, we saw in game one, even though he didn't get a ton of shots on net, he was driving play. He was driving to the net. He was throwing hits. Like last game, he had 2 hits on goal, but he also had 9 shot attempts. So 7, 4 missed, 3 blocked, and or sorry, what's that? 4, 5, 6, 8, sorry, 10 shot attempts because he had 3 on net. Like this guy is a leader. He was dominant in the faceoff dot. He is like the emotional leader of this team. As much as we talk about Quinn Hughes being the captain or Elias Pettersson arguably being maybe the most skilled forward, it's like JT Miller is built for the playoffs. Like if he can continue to be physical, if he can lead by example, if he can crash the net, good things are going to happen. And I mean, we saw it in game one. He was arguably one of their best players throughout the game. And then we saw how emotional he got playing in front of that Vancouver crowd, talking about how it like he compared it just behind like the birth of his kids and his wedding. Like how many times have you heard a player say that? So he's very invested in this, and you can tell that he's going to do everything he can to try to will this team to the second round.
Speaking of JT Miller, he's part of the leadership group, and talked about nerves and having all the guys calm. Whether it's game one, ruckus crowd, it's going crazy in there, having these guys best prepared as possible. And now having lost a game, how do you reset from that? Talked about that. So he's gonna do that with his leadership group, because when I was in the dressing room yesterday, uh, Quinn Hughes, he spoke, Pedersen spoke, and I couldn't even hear these guys. They were just so deflated from that loss. Their voices were very low, and I could barely hear them. So how do they rebound?
Well, I mean, that's why you bring in the Nikita Zadorovs, the Ian Coles, the Teddy Blugers, even JT Miller. Like he was on the New York Rangers when they went to the Stanley Cup final. He didn't play in the Stanley Cup final, but he was in that environment. He's been to 2 Eastern Conference finals, one with New York, or I guess 3, two with New York and one with Tampa Bay. Ian Cole, Cup winner. Teddy Bluger, Cup winner. Nikita Zadorov has gone on pretty long runs. Even Tyler Myers, I know that he didn't play yesterday, which was a massive factor, I think, because you lose some of that mobility on the back end. Noah Juleson was okay, but Tyler Myers kind of elevates that defense. Hopefully he's back for game 3. He had the flu as per Talkit. But like these guys, you look at, they have the playoff experience. I talked to Elias Lindholm before the series because a couple years ago, he was tasked with shutting down Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Now, even though Calgary ended up losing that series, he did do a decent job of shutting down those superstars, and learning how to play in those tough moments, especially in a Canadian city, are going to be crucial. So while a lot of the star players don't have the playoff experience like Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser, Philip Hronik doesn't have playoff experience. Niels Höglander, Vasily Podkolzin, when he gets in there. Connor Garland doesn't have a ton of playoff experience. So hopefully they can lean on these guys that have been there, that have experienced what it's like to play in these pressure situations, and there can be a calm in the dressing room. Nikita Zadorov was talking about, yep, we know that this is a long series. Let's move on to the next one. We're not going to focus on this game. Elias Pettersson even said, we learn from this game and we forget it and we focus on game 3. But this is something that we've talked about all year with this team, not getting too high, not getting too low. And now it's going to be a real test of their mentality as they go into Nashville, which, like I said, is going to be a very hostile crowd.
Speaking of experience, Casey DeSmith going into yesterday's game maybe had some 80 minutes of playoff experience in the NHL. In a tough spot, short notice, he gets thrown in there. We can't blame him for all those goals, but it doesn't look good that he gave up 3 on 15. It doesn't matter who it is. So what do you think I'm fast forwarding here. Say if they lose the next game, is there contemplation of, hey, Arthur Shelovs, is he going to get in? Do you see any situation where, we're assuming that Thatcher Demko doesn't make it back for this series, and barring no Casey DeSmith injury, do we see the third stringer come in?
The only way I think that Casey DeSmith gets switched for Arthur Shelovs, and I have a ton of faith in Shelovs, but I would be very hesitant of putting him into a game 4 situation where the team is down 2-1 in Nashville. Like, the only situation I could see that happening in is if Casey DeSmith just completely collapses and, we see like one of those Minnesota games where he allows 10 goals. I think that Tocchet has a ton of faith in Casey DeSmith, but Arthur Shelovs has a good track record in these type of high pressure situations. You think back to last year at the World Championship. I know it's a different situation, but he's playing at home in Latvia. He wins the bronze medal, and he's the MVP of the tournament. Like, he's shown that he can carry a team for a short period of time. The question is, once you go to Shelovs, can you go back to Casey DeSmith? Like, there's the mind game as well there. In this, as much as we say this is Tocchet's decision, this is all Ian Clark. Like, Tocchet really focuses on what Ian Clark has to say and what Ian Clark thinks. So this is going to be very interesting if Clark notices some questionable play in Casey DeSmith and has that faith in Shelovs, because as good as Shelovs has been, there have been some times where you can tell he's still learning and he's still developing, and that's a good thing. That's potentially your backup goaltender next year. But we'll have to see. It's also going to be interesting because Abbotsford is playing, so Tolopilo is their backup, or their on emergency call right now. So how they do their backup situation or their third stringer situation is going to be interesting, because they need him to be in Colorado while they're also in Nashville, because the games are on the same day. So this whole goaltending situation is going to be really interesting, and it's very Canuck that Thatcher Demko, that this team has a historic season. Thatcher Demko gets injured after game 1. Tyler Myers misses game 2. Like, this is just Canuck luck at this point. So this team is skilled enough to kind of move past it, I feel like, but I think that we have to also we have to separate each game. Like, there is momentum that builds, but I think that one bad performance from Casey DeSmith doesn't mean throw Shelovs into the fire right away. It's going to be a process. See how the Canucks play tomorrow. Also, it's really hard for a goaltender to only face 15 shots. Like, standing there for long periods of time, when you talk to goaltenders, they can lose focus. Like, even at the NHL levels. Not saying that DeSmith lost focus, but it's very, very difficult to face 15 shots in a game, with some of them even being, after the game is already 4-1. So let's just pump the brakes on this Shelovs going in, see how Smith comes back. The team is going to be fired up tomorrow. But if he has a bad performance, then the conversation starts to shift over to Shelovs.
In summary, though, we take a look at Thatcher Demko's injury history. Last year, he was out for quite some time where Spencer Martin and Colin Delia were handling the goalie duties. This year, he was out for some time where it was Otter Shilovs and Casey DeSmith. Does it concern you that, Demko long term may be injury prone?
Well, I think if I remember correctly, Demko has some lower body issues, mostly with his hips. The way he plays puts a lot of strain on his body because you do see he's very athletic, and you see these like split saves that kind of hurt you to watch. I think that there is some concern, especially with the goaltending, just because of the injury. Like, there's no question that Demko is a Vezina caliber goaltender. Like, I think we can put that aside. There's no question about performance. It's more about maintaining and staying healthy. Now, that's why they brought in DeSmith. Casey DeSmith is a valuable backup who who has played over 100 games in the NHL, has a good track record when needing to come in, has that Pittsburgh connection, has played one game in the playoffs and looked good. So I think the idea behind Casey DeSmith was a good idea. But also, like, it's hard to find goaltenders necessarily like that can play higher than Casey DeSmith at Casey DeSmith's price point. Like, we can talk about all these fantastic young goaltenders who are coming up, but how are they going to look in game 80 of a season where you're fighting for a division title? Or like Lucas Dostel in Anaheim is a good example. Like, he's fantastic, but what happens if you put him into a pressure situation? Logan or Devin Cooley in San Jose looked really good, but what happens if you put him into a playoff game? Like, it's great to have these young goaltenders, but there is something to be said about having somebody who has been in the league for years. If you have a situation like this in the playoffs, that can embrace that situation and be ready for whatever the crowd noise, whatever the atmosphere presents itself.
Yeah, Adam, I'm just going back on the history and the goalie kind of curse, you could call it, because it was back in I want to say '02. We saw three different starters come into that Detroit series. We saw Kluche play. I believe it was Hedberg, and in the last game we even saw Peter Skudra playing. Kluche did have his injuries, and that went on in 2004 as well. Kluche gets hurt. Hedberg came in, and Mark Crawford, the backup's always got a shorter leash, right? It's not like Kluche was a Vezina caliber goalie, but Hedberg played a couple, and then we saw Alex Eld close out the series by playing games 6 and 7 versus Calgary.
Well, I mean, we don't even have to look back that far. Look at 2011, Corey Schneider and Roberto Luongo. Corey Schneider goes in because Luongo's kind of struggling, and then he gets hurt, and then Luongo has to come back in. 2015, Eddie Lack and Ryan Miller. Eddie Lack starts that series. He didn't get pulled for injury, but Ryan Miller comes in. Eddie Lack kind of won that starting job going into the playoffs. But I mean, Brian Burke has even talked about Dan Kluche. It's like, if only he stayed healthy, like what we could have done if he stayed healthy, because he was one of the top goaltenders in the NHL, but he just kept getting hurt. So I think that there's going to be a lot of discussion around Demko next season, in that they need to space him out a little bit more. There were times where Demko was just going like 8-9 games in a row, but maybe you don't do that next year. Maybe you try to limit him to that 45 game mark. We're seeing a little bit more in the NHL of these teams going to two goaltender formations. Like, look at Boston, Olmark and Swayman. That's basically a split tandem. One might play more than the other, but even though Swayman won game 1, Olmark plays in game 2 in their first round series. Like, you look at those type of situations, where I think in the playoffs you can ride one goaltender for the majority of the playoffs, but I think that maybe we're at a point with Demko where you try to create a 1A 1B situation in the regular season, have him fully healthy, and then just see where it goes in the postseason.
Obviously, the main takeaway from yesterday's game was the Canucks' inability to execute, but was there any bright spot that you saw in their game yesterday?
Well, I mean, they had 47 hits, which is a playoff record. Or no, it's tied for the playoff record for the Vancouver Canucks. Like, Dakota Joshua has 8 hits. Dakota Joshua was fantastic all game. Nikita Zadorov had 4 hits, was fantastic all game. Phil DiGiuseppe had almost more hits than minutes in the game. He had 6 hits in 9 minutes. Like, that is pretty spectacular. So the physicality was a huge positive. They won the face-off battle, which I know that there are some people who don't believe that's a big deal, but Tocchet has mentioned that face-off battle over and over again. They absolutely destroyed Ryan O'Reilly in the face-off battle, which doesn't happen. So there are a lot of positives. If they play like that, they're going to win. Like, like I said, Nashville's not going to block 33 shots a game. Like, they physically cannot. Like, we saw multiple players go to the bench injured. Eventually something's going to break there. Like, Phil Peronic has knocked players out of the lineup with his shot this year. So it's kind of like I don't think we're going to see a situation like last night again, because I don't think Nashville's just going to completely park the bus as they did, even if they're up a goal or two. But Vancouver basically showed that they are the better team in this series, and that they just got unlucky in game 2. There's a lot that they can build on. If they start hitting the net more, it should help them, though.
I'm taking that Nashville hasn't played their best game yet, because they probably stole the game last night. It's fair to say, 15 shots and all those shots that they blocked. They deserve to win. We can say that, but the Canucks had a heck of a game. They're going home to Nashville. I expect them to dominate at least one of these games. So what's your prediction, Adam, the rest of the way here? It's 1-1. Do you see Canucks closing it out in 6? Do you see it going 7? What do you see happening?
I think that if you're the Canucks, you need to close it out in a 6, because you obviously can't let that 7 game be a deciding factor, because there's just too much emotions. There's too much that can go wrong in a 1-game series. So I think if you're the Vancouver Canucks, you need to win one of these 2 games. You can't. That's the start. Like, I know people will say, well, you need to just win the next 3, but focus on winning game 3, because that will give you momentum. If you win game 3, but you lose game 4, you're still in a good situation coming home. You're gonna have that fan atmosphere behind you, but you need to take one of these 2 games in Nashville for sure if they want to win the series. If Nashville wins both of these series, or both of the games in Nashville, it's not gonna be great coming back, but we'll see. There's gonna be a lot of pressure on Nashville playing at Bridgestone Arena like Vancouver, because Nashville was able to steal game 2. Like I said, the atmosphere in Nashville is one of the best in the NHL. They have a song where they basically say "you suck" to every player in the starting lineup. They have the car outside already ready to go that they're going to smash with the Vancouver logo and everything on there. It's going to be loud, but the players need to be able to embrace that. And this is part of playoff hockey. If you want to win a Stanley Cup one day, you're going to need to go into these buildings that are loud, that are hostile, and take points away.
I wonder if they still
Offensive.
got that banner, the Western Conference regular season champions.
Yeah, I believe they do. We were actually joking about that in the press box, if the Canucks would hang one if they won the Western Conference this year, but luckily they didn't. So we don't have to worry about the weird banners going up next season.
What's one key offensively you want to see from this team heading to Bridgestone Arena?
It's what Tocchet and the players have talked about all year, which is layers. UC Saros is a smaller goaltender. If Dakota Joshua is standing in front of UC Saros, like that's a mismatch right there. They have to get bodies to the lane. There's times where at even strength, they were basically playing an umbrella formation where they have 4 players on the outer rim, and then like I remember watching this with the Lotto line. You have JT Miller, Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson, Philip Peronic, and then Brock Besser is the only one in front of the net. Shot goes through. Brock Besser can't get to the front of the net. Easy save for UC Saros. Like, they need to create some havoc in front of the net. I talked to Pettersson earlier this year about wraparounds, and he told me, he's like, when you do a wraparound, the whole point is just to cause chaos in front of the net. If they can create that kind of chaos in front of the net through screens, through these, even if they're low percentage shots, like I said, shots in feet. Nashville does a really good job of absorbing pucks into their like midsection and then falling over, which kills a couple seconds. you can't do that when the puck's in your feet. It just doesn't that doesn't physically work. So if they can get those pucks in feet, if they can win some stick battles in front of the net, that should make a massive difference in game 3 and the rest of the series.
Hey, Adam, thanks for doing this. Awesome stuff with the hockey news covering the Vancouver Canucks as Adam Kierszenblat. We'll have you on again soon, my man.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.